But look, we've got three great presentations coming up in this plenary session. And so to get us started, I'd like to introduce someone who probably doesn't really need an introduction, which is great because it will save me some time. But Pat McGorry, from, as I said last night, from Ireland via Australia and Wales, has been instrumental in the building of this field of youth mental health over, well, a career now, really. And we're going to be privileged to hear from him today. I'd also like to just mention Asante Horton, who was originally going to do this slot, but unfortunately has become unwell and wasn't able to talk today. But a big shout out to Asante, and hopefully at a future conference we'll actually be able to hear from him, because I think that would have been a really incredible presentation as well. But thank you to Pat, and if you just come up here, and I think you're going to talk and start us off on this session on new interventions.
Well, thank you, Owen, and good morning, everyone. And I am off the bench, so you have to cut me some slack. And I'd like to wish Sante a very, very speedy recovery too. It's a real shame we didn't get to hear him, so really sorry about that. So at the last minute they asked me to talk about interventions or treatment, and so I'll try and do that. Let's see if the slide's actually working. Oh yeah, okay. So because of the theme of the conference, I'm going to talk about it from a preventive point of view, which is probably the way all of us have tried to work anyway in early intervention and youth mental health. So I hope this is going to make sense. So this is our homeland back in Melbourne. This is Origin. It didn't always look like this. It was fairly medieval for a long time, but in the last few years we've got this kind of mothership that we're all lucky to be able to be based in. And just like to acknowledge all of my Origin colleagues that are here at the meeting too, because we have a massive team effort, and it's also great to be in this global team effort with everyone here. It's such an amazing conference, and the feeling and the kind of the vibe is so great. Okay, so I'm not going to talk about this, but this is very important. The Lancet Commission that 54 people from all over the world collaborated on, including 10 young people as authors from very different countries. That's the first time that's ever happened to my knowledge, that young people have co-authored a scientific publication like this, and it was, again, an incredible global team effort to produce this. It was really about the reasons behind the youth mental health crisis and trying to understand that, but also showing all the amazing progress that gets captured at this meeting from so many different countries as well, and models of care was the focus. So that's the context for talking about what we do within the models of care. How do we actually help people? How do we work with people? And what are the things that are going to work? There's a lot of great ideas about what to do, but if they don't work, even if we might believe in them, they're not much use. So it's really having a scientific approach to it, the same as a human and compassion-based approach. So if you're going to treat people, you've got to talk about the issue of diagnosis. What is the purpose of diagnosis? It's been a very controversial issue in psychiatry, and it still is. It's a contested space. But if you just boil it down to what diagnosis is meant to be about, it's to help you pick or select treatments. There's no point in labelling people just for the sake of it. And we were talking about ADHD yesterday, and that seems, and ASD as well. I mean, there's no point in labelling people unless you're going to do something specific to help them. So that's the basis of diagnosis in medicine generally and the healthcare. But our diagnostic systems are not that great, to be honest, and they're controversial. The problem is that they're descriptive. They're not really based on anything clear about what is wrong with that person, but they are descriptive, and they do help to communicate, and they might help in guiding treatment, but we could improve on that. So we coined this term new diagnosis. How are we going to take it forward? And we had a workshop in Amsterdam. It was just before the pandemic. In fact, it's the first COVID patient came into the hospital while we were having the conference there, and then we all left, pretty much, straight after that. But we had an incredible couple of days with world experts from all over the world, and the purpose was to improve the utility of diagnosis and maybe try to look at a paradigm shift, and try to improve, discovery of new treatments, and also translation. And I'll finish on this point about psychological treatments. There's no point in putting all this energy into developing incredibly good treatments if people don't get access to them. And that is the case with psychological treatments, all over the world, really. And the problem when you're trying to complain about a system of diagnosis like DSM or ICD, what's the alternative? You've got the old paradigm, but you can't move beyond it because it's dying, but you don't know what the new thing is going to be. And that's a quote from Italian philosopher Antonio Gramsci, left-wing philosopher from Italy, and he wrote a lot of great things. So anyway, out of that workshop, we published this paper, and I think a number of the people that contributed to that are in the room, so acknowledging them. But it was published in Psychological Medicine late last year, if you want to read it. But what it tried to do was, and this is the other debate: can you have a paradigm shift, or should you just inch your way in improving slowly, bit by bit? And we think, obviously, in the youth mental health field and early intervention, that you need a paradigm shift, and I think that about diagnosis as well. But what is it, and what would it look like? And we came up with this idea that you had an ecosystem of new approaches. And the three approaches we looked at in this paper were the research domain criteria, which came out of IAYMH, which isn't really a diagnostic system at all. It's just a way of organising data and looking at mechanisms underpinning the different syndromes and clinical pictures that we see. And then there's this high top thing, which is basically factor analysis of massive data sets of people. And it isn't really anything new. The only thing that's new there really is better techniques, perhaps, and bigger data sets, and also saying that things are really dimensional, not categorical. And we all know in real life, people don't come in categories, they do come more in a dimensional sort of way. So that sort of is intuitively sensible to think that way too. And then there's our staging model, which is a bit of a blend of the two. It has categories, but it also is recognising the staging and the dynamic and evolving nature of psychopathology and clinical features over time. And obviously borrowing thinking from other areas of healthcare, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. So basically, we thought that a crucial step in constructing a new strategy, which had more utility, was to operationally define early clinical pictures, phenotypes. And that's obviously very relevant to early intervention, trying to recognise the earliest stage when someone needs help. And of course, at those early stages, it looks nothing like in the textbooks or the diagnostic manuals. It's much more fluid and ill-defined, but we have to try to understand how someone becomes mentally ill, how someone develops a need for care. What is the earliest, how does that process look in real life? And our youth mental health services that you've all contributed to developing have given us an opportunity to do that. We see these young people in the early stages when we're not sure what's really happening or what's going to happen. So we can study that. And we don't know if these early pictures, these early experiences that people have, which are distressing and impairing, we don't know where they're going to go. Are they going to end up in a more classical diagnosis like schizophrenia or bipolar or whatever, borderline, whatever pathway you're going to head down? Are those terms going to make more sense when they've had longer period of not being well? So that's the sort of thinking. Are they pluripotential, or can you see warning signs of a particular problem, and therefore you've got a chance to treat it more effectively at an earlier stage? And that's the basic idea of staging. And Jim Van Os published this paper a number of years ago. It's based on network analysis, which came from the Netherlands, and it's a really great idea, which actually regards symptoms as risk factors for each other. So if, like half the audience, you haven't been sleeping very well, you're getting a bit irritable and probably drinking too much, and losing energy, and then you start to worry about things back home, and these symptoms can kind of cascade and increase and cluster and cohere a bit more. And that's the idea. But on the other hand, they might just fade away. You might be fine, You adapt to the new time zone and having a great time with your friends, and it goes away. But that studying it like that with experience sampling is something that the Dutch have done a really great job on. And so we've got techniques to look at this when people are first becoming unwell. And I don't know if I can operate this, but from here, because you have to click the... No, it didn't work. Let's go back. I think I can go back. That previous slide showed experience sampling data over a number of months, and it shows how the different symptoms like anxiety or insomnia, how they wax and wane and interrelate with each other. And you can study this using these techniques, and then you see how a syndrome will actually form. Anyway, so we started thinking about staging about 30 years ago when we defined the ultra-high risk or clinical high-risk state, the sub-threshold state in people with warning signs of psychosis, basically. And we were studying early psychosis and trying to develop systems to treat in an early intervention mode. So we found this, what retrospectively is the prodromal stage, and we found that people had warning signs of psychosis before they became psychotic. And that led to a whole swathe of research over the last 30 years, a massive growth of research in this very early stage of schizophrenia and other psychoses. But we were thinking very, in a silo. We were thinking, all right, this is psychosis, this is a thing. And what we now think is much more transdiagnostic, because we've seen a lot more of these young people in Headspace and other settings like that. And there's a whole range of symptoms, and there's a whole range of different pathways and outcomes. So the idea has got much more general applicability than just for psychosis, actually. And some symptoms have got what I say is a valence for particular outcomes or syndromes. And definitely subthreshold positive psychotic symptoms do have a predictive power for psychosis. There's no question about that. But you can go other ways too. And there are other pathways. So Jim Van Os coined this term microphenotypes, meaning fragments of symptoms, really, or syndromes, not the full picture. And then later on you hear terms like schizophrenia or bipolar, but they're very late stage developments. They're late macrophenotypes is a way of thinking about them. And then the reason that staging is important, defining the stage of illness, is because the mechanisms underpinning a particular set of symptoms or impairments might be transdiagnostic. So, for example, inflammation. That's one of the things that's been studied a lot. It probably isn't just specific to one DSM category. If it's relevant at all, it might go across different categories, and it might be much more related to stage of illness than particular syndrome even. So there's a whole lot of mechanisms that are being studied. That's the big thing now in research, trying to understand either the biological or the psychological or the social mechanism underpinning a particular problem or disorder. And then obviously the treatments can be linked to the mechanisms and also to the stage. And the idea of staging is that if you're treating early, the treatment has to be safer and more effective. Otherwise, there's no point in distinguishing between stages. And if you think about cancer, that's the case. If you pick up cancer in a very early stage, the treatment's very simple and it's curative. But if you wait for it to spread and develop, then it's much more difficult to treat them. And I think we've got really good evidence that that's the case in mental health now too. Not just in a biological sense, but in a social sense. If you're left untreated for years when you're an adolescent or a young adult, your life just passes you by, and it's very hard to rebuild that. So in that sense, early treatment along this staging idea is very important. Anyway, so with my colleague Ian Hickey, we've worked on this for about 15 years, and other people have made contributions like Jai Shah, who's at the conference, Barnaby Nelson, and Frank Iofino, he's here too. So people, the younger generation, Dominic Dwyer back at Origin, they're all very interested in this and working very hard on taking it further as an idea and making it more usable, I suppose, in the real world. Okay, so there's a couple of papers describing how we've moved to that idea. And this all links very much, I'm sure many people in the audience are familiar with this concept, which came from the Institute of Medicine in the early to mid-90s in the US, from Razak and Haggerty. It's the spectrum of intervention, really, from prevention right through to rehabilitation at the other end of the spectrum. And it's the sort of spectrum of mental health interventions. And you can see that there are several types of prevention, and we would call that stage 0 at the bottom end. You know, that's when people don't have any symptoms, but they're at risk for a particular disorder. And then you move through when the first symptoms appear, and that's like the first aspect of early intervention. And then there's standard treatment for later stages, and then for the much more advanced stages of the illness, you're looking at things like rehabilitation at the other end. So it fits with the staging idea as well. It's a way of thinking about interventions and treatment, and the timing is incredibly important. That's the point of all this. Okay, so that's staging. So if we think about stage 0, and some of this stuff is taken from the Commission and also from other papers. Now, if we're seeing a big rise in prevalence of mental ill health in young people, we have to ask ourselves, what is going wrong with society to cause this? We know that a lot of risk factors for mental disorders, child neglect, child abuse, illicit drugs, poverty, disadvantage, all those, they've been known for a long time. We know what the risk factors are, but something changed about 15 to 20 years ago, and we don't really know for sure what it is, but it's something new. It's either a worsening of the normal risk factors, or it's something new, maybe a number of new things. And that's what we looked at in the Commission. And this paper, basically, it draws on the work of Michael Marmot, who said, what's the point of treating people and returning them to the circumstances that made them sick? In other words, it's the environment in which they're living in which is making them unwell. And that certainly seems to be the case with the rise in prevalence in youth mental health. And people get caught up on confusing cause and effect. People say, well, there's no point in treating people because the social determinants are so powerful. But you've got to try and do both. You've got to try and do prevention, and you can't just neglect all the people that are just in need of care. So that's a key point. The other thing that this paper makes the point about is that this is a socio-political issue. If you're going to start looking at what's wrong with society, then you're getting into politics, basically, and you're getting into political economy and this sort of thinking. And so it's up to us to start thinking more deeply about those things, like this paper encourages us to do. And some people don't like that. They just want to stick to their knitting and just stick with being a straight clinician or whatever. And that's fine, they can do that. But someone's got to start thinking about this stuff, and we certainly did that with the Commission. Vikram Patel, who's at Harvard, he's an expert in global mental health. I'm sure most people in the audience have heard of him. He's one of the great leaders in psychiatry and mental health. He wrote an impassioned editorial in the 200th anniversary of The Lancet a year or two ago. And he started to say things which you wouldn't expect a conservative fellow at Harvard to be saying. Like, it was about human rights and harms to mental health inflicted on the public by policies, by government policies, and what's happening and we're seeing it get even worse, obviously, since he wrote that. And he says these harms are directly or indirectly a result of policies that have led to, amplified and sustained diverse forms of structural violence, which are critical drivers of mental health. And he refers to the colonial and neoliberal economic policies that have led to the devastation of marginalised populations and environments, and to grotesque levels of inequality. And we are seeing actually grotesque levels of inequality these days. Just a quote from Australia. 20 years ago, the most wealthy 200 people owned the equivalent of 8% of GDP. Now they own 25% of that. So we're seeing a massive movement of wealth upwards in society to fewer people. And, while it's not exactly the same thing as poverty or disadvantage, but inequality as a variable has got worse. Young people are suffering from it more than anyone else, intergenerational inequality. And it's toxic. It's not just toxic to mental health, it's toxic to the society and any social parameter you care to look at. Incarceration rates, teenage pregnancy is all correlated highly with the degree of inequality in the society. So these are the sort of things that, if we're thinking about stage naught and universal risk, we've got to think about that. Okay, so back to treatment, back to the more personalised transdiagnostic care which we're sort of aiming for, I think. And there are things being developed that help that with. We've got to recognise that even when you have a label or a diagnosis of some sort, it's a heterogeneous group. It's a descriptive thing. So there are different mechanisms or different combinations of risks and processes going on in different people. There are common needs from the label, but they're not going to work for everybody, and a different mix of treatments is probably going to be needed for each person. Certainly on a psychological level, everyone's a unique person psychologically, so you have to be able to be flexible and personalised on the psychological side, and increasingly on the biological side as well. But we don't know enough about the mechanisms to really target these biological treatments yet. There are innovations. There are all these new therapies that we've tested. We've done clinical trials of many of these things. But new forms of psychotherapy and new ways of delivering psychological treatments, like through virtual reality, for example, and other sort of tech-based approaches. Something that's very popular at this conference, but not researched enough, is expressive therapies like art and music and we had a great example in the session just before how that's good for your mental health. And Johann Hari wrote a book called Connections. The first couple of chapters were just anti-psychiatry tirade, but after that he got onto some really important things when he started to talk about connection to nature, connection to other people, and all these other sort of incredibly important therapeutic things that we don't build into our services strongly enough at all. So there's a lot of things that we could do a lot more work on. And I love that quote at the bottom: therapy's like trying to find a shoe that fits, because if it doesn't, you won't be able to take those 2 steps forward. So you've got to fit. It's a delicate thing to find, the person and the therapy that's going to work for you. Sorry, we're doubling up on that. So just continuing with this idea of fundamentals of treatment, something that's not respected in most traditional services is the vital importance of the therapeutic relationship and continuity of care. The fact that you have continuity with one person through the course of your treatment and journey. In public mental health, they don't seem to care who you see as long as you see someone. And in the same service, they don't necessarily allocate you to the person you saw last time. There's no respect for this, the actual importance of the trust and the relationship that has to develop. And it's incredibly powerful when that works. And it's also almost necessary for any of the other treatments to really work. And that starts with the first interview. And you have to find the person. You have to touch that person and connect with that person in that first interview. Otherwise, it's much more difficult. Then there's all that literature which people have probably forgotten from about 30, 40 years ago on common therapeutic factors in psychological treatments. Jerome Frank's work. 60% of the outcome variance in a therapy is explained by these common therapeutic factors, like offering hope and optimism, and there's about 12 of them. And then they're independent of whether it's psychodynamic therapy or CBT or whatever it is. So that's something people don't value enough, those common features. Something that's really important is that we've talked about a lot at this meeting is things like shared decision making and having a negotiated approach to what the person needs and is able to work on. And that phrase from yesterday's plenary, seeing with 2 eyes, that's a much more widely applicable concept, I think, because it's not just Indigenous cultures that look at things differently. It's every culture, and it's every person actually. So you have to basically bring these 2 worlds together somehow, and respecting each one equally. And then focusing on needs-based care. So symptom relief is one aspect of it, and it's not to be discounted because distress and other symptoms are pretty damaging. But then the functional focus that Owen has worked on for years, keeping that functional focus, recovery focused in a social and occupational sort of sense, and dealing with which mental health service, because they've contracted and narrowed so much into a very narrow medical sort of approach, purely clinical approach. So all the social care like housing, relationships, vocational pathways, those sort of things are not really offered by traditional mental health services, and they're also very important. And you often can't treat people if those things, hierarchy of needs, are not actually dealt with. So, but we haven't got necessarily the models or the resources to do that enough. Then there's innovation coming from tech and digital, virtual reality, and then imagery-based therapies that Emily Holmes and her colleagues have been working on. That's another very creative way of tackling particularly trauma-related sort of problems. And then, of course, the peer work, lay health workers, and the friendship bench type of idea. We've been discussing that as well. The power of engaging people in a much more informal and flexible sort of way. All these things are great things which should be built in to all of our approaches in different ways. Now, I'm just going to rip through a couple of the main diagnostic spectra, and it's pretty incomplete, so you have to forgive me. I couldn't do literature reviews all night, so it's a bit of a cook's tour. So early psychosis, which is the area that I've worked in mostly, these are the sort of things that I think are cutting-edge sort of things that we need to do. We need to understand, and I think Jai Shah's been working on this, we need to make more of these pre-psychotic, if you like, patients, accessing them during this sub-threshold stage is very important, but we only see about 10 or 15% of them before they actually become psychotics. In an early psychosis service these days, most of the people that you see in the first episode won't have been identified in this stage one. They're picked up all too often in an emergency department in stage 2. So we're not getting to people in this earliest possible stage. Maybe the integrated youth service model is better at doing that because every young person that's struggling can come to that, but it still hasn't been clear that that's the solution to that, but we should work on that. And then the work that they did in Norway, showing how to reduce duration of untreated psychosis by mass community education programs and mobile detection teams. Hardly any early psychosis services do that. Maybe they don't have the money to run advertising campaigns into the public. Maybe they don't really want to do the mobile detection, but those things reduce DUP from a year or two to a matter of weeks. And in Melbourne, our DUP is just a few weeks. But most services still, in standard settings, the DUP is a year or two, and that's a disaster. If you're psychotic for a year or two at that stage of life, very hard to come back from that. The treatments don't work as well when they're offered. Clozapine. There are some new antipsychotics that are being developed, which is for the first time, which is encouraging, but clozapine, it takes 4 years to be offered clozapine. It could be offered in the first 4 months. It's obvious when the need is there. That's transformative if in about a third of patients who haven't responded to other treatments. But clinicians are often too lazy to actually do it. And they make all sorts of excuses like the patient doesn't like needles or blood tests. But it's really the clinicians that are reluctant to commit to actually using the medication. And I can speak personally, one of my sons is on clozapine, a low dose of clozapine, and it transformed his life. And I think everyone should have access to that. If they're not better in the first few months, then they should be considered for that. So that's something that's not done. I won't go through all the other ones, they're pretty obvious. Mobile home treatment, hospital in the home, that's an incredibly great way of avoiding the emergency department and an acute inpatient ward experience. A lot of patients can be treated that way if you configure your services that way. extending the tenure of the early psychosis services to at least 5 years is an important thing. Digital enhancement by, in our case, the MOST program, developed by Murray Alvarez, and now virtual reality as another way of delivering, CBT-type interventions is something that's really exciting. And then the debate between dose reduction or discontinuation after a first episode of medication versus longer-term adherence, and the evidence is getting clearer on that, but I won't go into it right now. So, eating disorders. This is an area that we really want to see some progress in. There's been nothing new for 30 years in this space. The treatments are very limited. They're quite punitive and just focused on weight restoration mainly. The actual mental health treatments are very weak, and people seem to get better despite treatment some of the time. It's a very difficult problem to treat if you wait until it's really entrenched. It's another example where quite possibly intervening at a very early stage, and we did see a lot of young people in the pandemic in very early stages, and they did seem to respond much better to more simple and generic sort of interventions. So I think that's a great area to research. We can't get enough research funding. It's a very neglected area. And it's a very closed and siloed area, which is very complacent as well, So it really needs a massive shake-up and to be brought into this more transdiagnostic world, I think. And we have to understand what it is. I don't think there's a fundamental understanding of what particularly anorexia even is. There's lots of differences of opinion of what's the nature of the actual illness. So it's a challenge, really, in that area. So those are some of the solutions. And having a more relational psychotherapeutic approach is something that could be worked on, and whether there are any biological treatments that might be able to be developed, that's another possibility. I'll leave that because just to say that there are some new treatments emerging in mood and anxiety. I mentioned the connections idea, which is pretty relevant there, but I think that's kind of an area which is developing. There are controversies there as well, of course. Substance use, I think in youth mental health, we see young people in the early stages of this and a lot of sort of self-medication comorbidity, but it's still siloed and split off in many settings from the mental health treatment, which is a big problem. But it's a preventive opportunity. If you can treat the underlying mental health condition, then the drive to self-medication and continuing with that coping mechanism can be reduced, and that's something that Jill Beattie is working on at Origin. And just the last one, personality disorder, and I'm very indebted to Andrew Channon, who's here, for his great work in this area, and he's given me a couple of slides to show you. But again, early intervention, intervening early in youth services is a great opportunity. It seems to be a lot more treatable if you see it in its early stages. What it is also debatable, I think. You could see it more as an Axis 1 type of disorder that responds to treatment. But it seems to be pretty embedded in this personality disorder area, which personality disorder is not a nice term in a way. So is there a better way to think about it? The role of trauma, that's an intense debate. It's obviously a risk factor, a massive risk factor, but it's not necessary or sufficient. You can have this syndrome without trauma, and if you've had trauma, you're not necessarily going to develop it. So it's not a one-to-one relationship, although some people think it is. And of course, there's a lot of comorbidity, a lot of iatrogenic harm happening to these patients because they're rejected and mistreated by services. So Andrew's done a series of studies there. The MOBI trial is probably the most important. And what it showed was that offering more specific psychotherapy, in this case cognitive analytic therapy, didn't have an advantage over just offering good clinical care at an early stage within a team-based approach. So you didn't have to be a fancy, highly trained psychotherapist to actually help these patients. And that's a very important finding. But it might be a timing finding when the treatment is actually delivered. Yeah, so this is his interpretation. So effective early intervention for BPD is not reliant on specialist psychotherapy. It does require youth-orientated care in a system. So that's really the main findings there. An early diagnosis did allow for the early application of simpler and more effective treatments. So it kind of fits with the staging model again, the same idea. Simpler treatments work if you get in early. And finally, I probably won't go through this because I've got to wind up now, but this is just an example of a study we did to try to clarify not just the content of treatment in early stages of illness. This is in ultra-high risk or clinical high risk, and it's actually an adaptive trial. It sort of models what clinicians do. We recruited about 340 patients, and they went through a series of steps. And if they were not better, they graduated to the next step. So the treatment changed if the person wasn't responding to the earlier, simpler treatment. And we found that, when we defined recovery, we really wanted to get them completely better. It wasn't just that they improved. We defined recovery as getting completely better. And it was kind of a bit disappointing because even though we offered them initially simple treatments and then CBT and then adding an antidepressant, this is in ultra-high risk subthreshold psychosis. These are sort of a needs-based sort of treatment that they didn't really get better. They improved, but only about 25% of them actually went into remission as a result of current treatments. And so what we think is that we need new forms of treatment to be applied here, new options. This is not good enough. Thus, these sort of things that clinicians are probably offering these patients at the moment is not going to be enough to get them well. It might stop them becoming psychotic, but they're not better. So I won't go through all that, but that's the essence of that. So the last thing I just want to say is this is an important review of psychological treatments. It's the Marburg Declaration. It was published, I think, a year or two ago. It's a really comprehensive look at the status of psychological treatments and research in it. And it has comments on things like meta-analysis, about how meta-analysis is distorting people's understanding. It could have been listed in the misinformation session yesterday, actually, because people do these meta-analyses and they come to the wrong conclusions all the time. But they're very influential. And so it's worth reading the critique of that. But it goes through all the different psychological treatments, what's happening, and they make the big point that I said at the beginning, that psychological treatments, a lot of work has gone into developing them and testing them and proving that they work, but very few people get access to them. Very few people get access to evidence-based psychological treatments around the world. I don't know what people are actually doing when they see patients, but they don't actually do these evidence-based treatments. They have what a colleague in Adelaide describes, probably nice chat therapy, which is sort of nice, but you could do better than that. You can do more, and that declaration tells you how we should go about as a field, improving that, and also the implementation of these things. So, I guess it's a very exciting world if you look at all these different dimensions and all the new things that we still need to develop and work on, and we've got to do it within a very nice therapeutic, optimistic culture of care, which I think the youth mental health field is developing. So it's the perfect place to be looking at these individual components in a preventive and proactive and optimistic way. And so I hope that resonates with all of you. And thanks for listening.
Sorry, it's really rude to cough into a microphone. Thanks, Pat. That was really wonderful. And just when I need it, my voice is beginning to not work. Our next speaker is Shuranjeet Singh, and I would ask you to come up here, Shuranjeet. I'm not going to spend long introducing, because Shuranjeet and I are going to have a chat. And who he is and what he does will come across, hopefully, if I ask the right questions. This is kind of weird, isn't it? Sorry. So, Shuranjeet, one of the things I really love to start with, and I recognise this is kind of weird, this kind of chair setup, but anyway.
It's quite cosy. I like it. Feels very intimate.
It does, doesn't it? Either that or we're in business class or something on a plane.
Yeah.
But
You're in business class.
And in business class, the president brings you drinks. So one of the things I really love to start with, we're a youth mental health field. I'd love to know what you were like when you were in that phase of your life. What was going on?
When I was young.
I mean, you still are young.
Thank you, thank you. See, that's the response I was looking for. I appreciate that a lot.
But, you know, back in that phase, like that sort of adolescent, early adult, who were you then?
So, put your hand up if you were a rebellious teenager. And if you're sat next to someone who you didn't think was a rebellious teenager, now you know they were a rebellious teenager. And I think that's heartening. I think that's so lovely. And with that in mind, I was slightly rebellious, not full-blown rebellious. And I think there's a good quick story that outlines that.
Yeah.
I remember once my mum came down and said, "Oh, we're going to your auntie's house." And I was like, "Oh my God." And I said, "Okay, apologies, I need to go and see some friends." And I came downstairs in my fake nose ring and some really, really skinny jeans. Like these were like dangerously skinny jeans. And they were like, "Okay, you go and do your thing. We're going to pop out. We'll be back in a bit." And so I went to go and see some friends, came back home and realized the jeans wouldn't come off. And I was like, "Oh God, how do I do this?" I considered using some scissors to snip them off, but I had to go back to my parents and say, "Guys, my jeans won't come off. Can you help me take them off?" And so that was, I think, a really good example of my adolescence, which is part of me wanting to be like, "I can do this myself. I look great." And then part of me being like, "Actually, I really need those around me." And I think that tension for me is a theme that existed throughout my youth. And I remember kind of coming to a resolution with that in my early 20s and sitting down, just kind of having just gone traveling with some friends, sitting down and thinking, God, my parents are people. My parents are people with lives. They're people that had lives before I was here, and they've given so much to be able to support me and my siblings. And that just completely overwhelmed me at that point. And I remember reflecting and thinking about how annoying I must have been as a teenager who wouldn't go and see their auntie and who wore jeans that were way too tight for him.
Well, I'm glad there was no long-term damage.
There might be. There might be.
There might be. So after the jeans, because we need to probably start to talk about what actually the incredible work you have been doing. So you presumably finished school, you went to uni, and then what happened?
Well, for me, it was the going to uni, which really kicked everything off. I was the first in my family to leave the city we were born and raised in, which is Birmingham in the UK. Big shout out to Birmingham. Does anyone know where Birmingham is? We love that. We love that. On the side, I'm a Birmingham diplomat, so I have to do that. Nice. It's a part of my Birmingham diplomat contract. And for me, that wasn't easy. You know, I was born and raised in a neighborhood called Handsworth in Birmingham that has been a extra points. We love that.
You brought the neighborhood with you.
You know what? How you have to do it. Yeah. Well, I was born and raised in a neighborhood called Handsworth, which was and has been a hub for migration over the last 60 years. I'm talking communities from the Caribbean, the South Asia in the 1960s and 70s, communities from Central Eastern Europe, Southeast Asia in the 90s and 2000s. It's always been a place that people come to build their base. And I was really used to being around communities from all over the world. I was used to being around cultures from all over the world. And I was used to walking down my high street and smelling all the fantastic food from cuisines around the world. But the change for me happened when I went to uni. And suddenly, the demographic at my university did not reflect the demographic that I was born and raised with. And there weren't really people who looked like me. There weren't really people who understood the context that I came from. And suddenly, I felt incredibly, incredibly alone for the first time in that way in my life. Mm. And over that period of my undergrad, that loneliness really sunk in different ways. It impacted my daily life. It impacted the things that I used to do, or the things that I didn't used to do, the friends that I wasn't able to make, and the relationships that I just wasn't able to kind of keep going from back home. And it was through important conversations with my housemates towards the end of university that I realized the struggles that I'd been going through, and I realized the struggles that they'd also been going through. And it was through those conversations, creating a space of non-judgment, creating a space where people can be themselves without fear of being stigmatized or shamed, that I realized the power of people being able to connect as equals, and the power that has for our mental health and our well-being, and supporting us to live the lives that we want to live.
Sounds like an incredible realization. So what did you do with that?
We sat down and played a lot of PlayStation whilst talking to each other. No, in reality, I did a lot of reflection on why that was so great.
Yeah.
And I realized that there was so much that we needed to reconnect with as people and as communities that has a lot to do and a lot to support us for our mental health and well-being. And I realized that there were many folks in the communities I was born and raised in, so largely with Punjabi communities back home in Birmingham, where people were going through similar struggles but weren't able to get the help that they needed. And I have a firm belief in community. You know, we know that there is so much that clinical services are able to offer to people for their mental health and well-being, but I'm a firm believer that communities are able to organize and able to support each other just as they have done over generations to help ease some of the pressure on our health and social care services, and also to help rebuild some of those connections that sometimes we feel as though we've lost as our society becomes more and more hyper-individualized.
And I noticed there, because often from the outside in a lot of discourse, people would talk about the Punjabi community, but I noticed you said the communities.
It was a big thing. When I started kind of working with Punjabi communities around mental health, I realized very quickly there is no single Punjabi community. Especially if we're wanting to work in an intersectional way, I need to be constantly reminded that there are going to be parts of Punjabi communities we don't necessarily work with immediately. And that's okay as long as we have the solutions to be able to take our work forward by being inclusive, being self-critical, but also being kind of focused on an intersectional approach. And so I took the decision to just switch. Generally, when I talk about communities, I try and refrain from talking about the community. I try and use the plural. And it's one of those small things that people sometimes ask me about.
Yeah.
And I explain that actually, if we are homogenizing, if we're bringing these communities down to a single idea, there are going to be folks, and often it's the folks who are most disadvantaged and the most multiply marginalized, who are just going to go unseen. And we will continue this cycle of supporting some and forgetting others.
So after the reflection, after the PlayStation, you founded an organisation, and what was that?
Yes, so having experienced the challenges that I did, receiving the support I did from community, I founded an organisation called Tarakī. So Taraki works with Punjabi communities to reshape approaches to mental health. And the word Taraki is a word found in Punjabi, in Hindi, in Urdu, and in a couple of other South Asian languages, but it's part of the verb to progress, to move forward, to advance. And at that point, I have to shout out my mum, who came up with the name. So give my mum a clap. Give all mums and motherly figures an absolute clap.
Never stopped helping you since your adolescence.
Absolutely. At first it was the genes, and then it was Tarakī. And so we started that work about 7 years ago, working alongside Punjabi communities to reshape approaches to mental health. We support and work with communities to develop community-level interventions for mental health and well-being, which focus on mental health awareness, training and development, peer support, and then a bit of work on research and policy as well.
So underpinning the way that you do those different kinds of activities, is there kind of an approach, an approach that holds all of that together?
Yeah, I think it's kind of secret decolonial work, right? Because often when we are talking about decolonial work and decoloniality, we can get lost in the books. And I feel when I go and speak with our communities about this work, I can't get lost in the books, because the academy is very difficult to penetrate if we haven't had the privilege to be able to learn and connect in that way. And so there are two general approaches that I take through Tarakī. One, as I mentioned, is trying as best as we can constantly for our work to be intersectional. And then the second being taking a strengths-based approach to our community organising. And for those who might not be aware, taking a strengths-based approach is about focusing on community strengths as a starting point for dealing with different issues and challenges. Because oftentimes we are told that we are the ones who know. You know, us having studied this or experienced that, we therefore know what's going on, what's right and what's wrong. However, in reality, we know that our communities have been supporting each other in different ways over the years. We don't just focus on the challenges that they present with, but also the strengths that they have driven forward with, that they've survived with over decades, over centuries, and in cases over millennia as well. So we take a strengths-based approach to our work, and that's been eye-opening because, you know, there are various different things that I didn't really notice when I was growing up that actually act as a strength. And actually support us to develop our mental health and well-being. And there's one of them that sticks out to me that's always really funny. I remember when I was out at uni and I'd been to go and see, you know, the university mental health services, and they said you should try mindfulness, and I was like, okay, cool, all right, let me look into this. And I went back home and I said, oh, Mum, Dad, have you heard of mindfulness? This is what it is. And they looked at me and they were like, we've been doing that with you since you were born. And I was like, oh yeah. But suddenly it's got a name in a different way. And suddenly, you know, in a way that the kind of spiritual essence has been ripped out and kind of replaced. And that's an entirely separate conversation. But these are the kind of approaches that I think have been really important in the work that we do.
I mean, it's interesting because there's a few things. Like I don't know if you heard the In Conversation event last night, but I think someone was making the exact same point about yoga. That you know, it's not just stretching, but there's a whole other bigger practice that goes with it.
Absolutely. And I was just going to say, you know, when I was growing up and I had the flu, my grandma would come up to me with like haldi dud, which is turmeric milk. And I'd be like, nah, forget this. And now I can buy it in Starbucks, and I'm just like, whoa. And suddenly everyone's having it, and it's like, damn, something changed. Something changed. Now, you know, now there's a better price point, and we can all drink our turmeric lattes in peace.
So getting Tarakī off the ground, I mean, there will be other people out here today who are maybe where you were 7 years ago, who have realised an issue or a problem in their community or communities. How was it difficult? How did it happen?
So a lot of it was actually me just putting myself out there and being okay with a lot of people not responding, and being persistent and being kind of brave and, you know, hopeful in the vision that I had kind of had to work with our communities. So our first kind of project that we did back in 2017 was around Punjabi men's mental health awareness. And this was a kind of quite a basic project around sharing testimonials for Punjabi men related to their mental health and well-being. And I'd seen these conversations, particularly around men's mental health, take steps forward in different parts of our society. But I didn't see any men from our communities talking about these issues. And for me, that risked our communities being left behind. And so we started these conversations, and I remember I would share my experiences and invite other men to be able to share theirs. And it was weeks until I got a response from someone wanting to share. You know, maybe 3-4 weeks. And then after I shared theirs, it was 3-4 weeks until the next. But slowly that 3-4 weeks turned into 2 or 3 weeks. Slowly that 2 or 3 weeks turned into a week and a half. And then slowly you build up momentum. But I think the key in there is about being persistent, being brave, and having faith in the fact that you can make a difference. You can make a positive impact on our world. And you have to have a bit of stubbornness. You have to have a bit of stubbornness about you, because people will tell you, oh, you should be doing this, you should be focusing on that. And sometimes it's those who have been in the space for 30, 40 years who are going to tell you this is something really important to focus on. And yes, those insights are important, but they might not be relevant to you in the work that you want to do.
It's a really interesting point in thinking back to the slide that Pat had about, the problem with, the new thing is being born and the old won't die. I can't remember quite, Pat, how the saying goes. Because I'm actually always really interested when people are starting new things. I think inevitably they encounter the kind of resistance that you're describing. I think you've been very polite in describing it. I think sometimes it's, that status quo almost doesn't want new things. So if you were to be maybe less polite, how do you overcome that? Because there is so much inertia, and there is, it's sometimes the status quo, it's the establishment, it's the done way of doing things. And you're right, people don't want to change. So, here, we want to be part of a revolution in youth mental health. So how do we be revolutionaries? How do we fight against the inertia of the status quo?
For me, a lot of that inertia comes from ego.
Yeah.
A lot of that inertia comes from the fact that people believe they know, and they're the ones who know, and they're the people who are allowed to know, whilst other people don't. And I think that question of ego is something that ripples up throughout the academic space. Over the last couple of days, I've listened and connected with folks who are mental health advocates, community mental health kind of leaders and stewards, people in the research space, in the academic space, clinicians. There are people here, whilst we're all brought together to occupy this space around youth mental health, we all exist at a different point in that hierarchy of knowledge. There are different ways in which our knowledge and expertise as community organisers is seen alongside those who might be clinicians, those who might be academics with significant experience and all the peer-reviewed papers you could ask for. Mm-hmm. And so for me, it's about us all continually questioning ourselves and our positionality, and recognizing that whilst we might not intend for it, some of the approaches and some of that inertia that we might have comes from ego. Yeah. Which is a really difficult thing to say, but...
This is where we should be saying the difficult things.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. So you set up, finally got people to pay attention. You've been going for 7 years. Tell us some of the things that you've achieved over that time.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that makes me most proud is our work, particularly around peer support for Punjabi men. So back when we first started our peer support spaces in 2018, it was me and no one. Because I'd turn up, no one would turn up. And it's like, okay, that's cool. I can sit, do a bit of work. But slowly, we saw men wanting to connect and men wanting to engage. And for me, it was beautiful because people often write off boys and men when it comes to conversations around mental health and well-being. But we just need to know how to have those conversations, and we need to know how to engage. And so leading up to the pandemic, we had peer support spaces taking place in Birmingham, in Toronto when I was studying there. And during the pandemic, everything moved online. But over the last few years, we've taken a slightly different approach, which is our peer support model. We've kind of distilled it into a training and education program. And we now work with grassroots community organizations who serve Punjabi communities to support them to be able to develop and deliver this type of Punjabi men's peer support in their localities. And, I'm, as I mentioned, based in Birmingham in the UK, but this Saturday we have one of our peer support spaces happening just outside Vancouver in Surrey. We have the fabulous Anushka, who is our partner in Melbourne. Anushka, you can, there we go. And it just by happenstance that we're both in this space at this point. And so for me, there is a real beauty in being able to do that work, because people often write off those conversations, particularly around Punjabi men, racialized men, and mental health. And they say, oh, how do you get men to talk? And I say, well, if you create the space right, it's not hard getting people to talk. It's hard getting them to stop talking. Because 45 minutes after you finish, everyone still wants to chill and chat. Yeah. And so these are really good problems, but I feel like that's one of the things that makes me so proud, because as a Punjabi man and as someone who has struggled with their mental health themselves, we're able to create that space for others. And to be honest, the person I learnt that from was my dad. My dad was very open with me from a young age about his struggles with mental health. And I remember when I was 9 or 10 years old, and I would kind of sit on the side of the bed, and my dad would just be sat on the bed talking to me about different issues and challenges. And there's a character from, I completely forgot what film, but the character's called Mervyn, and it's like a robot. It's like Eeyore. It's like a similar thing to Eeyore. And my dad used to say that was the period of life where he was Mervyn or he was Eeyore. And then it was actually only later, after I'd started Tarakī, that Dad said to me, "Do you remember when we used to have those conversations?" And I was like, "I remember having them, but I don't remember what they're about." And he said that was you supporting me with my mental health and well-being at that point of my life. And so for me, it's come full circle, where he created that space, for me and him. And I'm trying to work at a grassroots level, around the world to be able to create that space for others.
Great. So I also understand you did all this and you went back to uni and you started a PhD. Can you tell us a little bit about that journey and where that went?
Yeah, absolutely. So the PhD was focusing specifically on how we understand lived experience involvement. So the involvement of people who have lived experiences of mental health challenges in mental health research, if they're also bringing other types of marginalization with them as well. So essentially, from my angle, it's how can we do intersectional lived experience involvement in mental health research? Like, what happens when these different types of power intersect with one another? And it was fascinating to kind of dig into all of those issues and challenges. And I saw that there were so many amazing people doing work in that space. But 5 months ago, I took the decision to stop it.
Well done, you.
Yeah, I have massive respect for everyone who is obviously doing or has done a PhD. But I realized that actually that wasn't the calling I needed at that point to be able to do the work that I need to do on the ground. I looked at the PhD and it was very interesting from an academic standpoint. And, I loved jumping into all the literature. But there were different ways in which my communities needed me. And I needed to reshift my focus towards that work.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know, I just took the decision and I was said to my supervisors, "Folks, this isn't the right time."
Yeah.
And they were very understanding and very supportive, but that wasn't easy for me. It wasn't easy, again, kind of from an ego perspective, because I wanted to do my PhD.
And, there's a lot of status and all the other stuff that goes with that.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And so, but yeah, we just took the decision to stop that and focus on what I need to focus on at the moment, because that work's immediate. A PhD can happen at any point if you want to.
We've got a couple of minutes left. So look, one of the things I'm interested that kind of springboards off that, you've essentially created this movement, which sits in that sort of third space. But it must have to also interact with the other things in the system, so, academia, health, and the community. So how does that happen?
So I think it's always interesting when you're doing work around community organising, things can happen at a really good and exciting pace. And you're able to make and engage with people at a fantastic rate, especially if you're working at that grassroots level. One of the hardest things I have to do is engage with our health systems, because it is 20 meetings for any kind of decision, and it's like, who has the money to pay for someone to sit in 20 meetings for a potential decision that could be helpful or couldn't be helpful? No offense to anyone working in health systems. I'm sure it's not many of you.
We'll run out the back.
Yeah, I'll run out the back, it's all good. But then also kind of working with our academic institutions, again, there are barriers. There are massive barriers to those who are working in community contexts to build those relationships with academic partners, to build equitable relationships with academic partners, rather than to potentially be a kind of tokenistic partner on a grant application. And then working with our health systems can be even more difficult unless you have an in. And by definition, these barriers are stopping our health systems, our academic partners, to be able to connect in with those on the ground who are doing the delivery, who are doing the work on the ground every day to support people with their mental health and well-being, in ways that often are innovative, in ways that often are quite forward-thinking. And so, my plea to those in health systems and those in the academic space is, when we're working with our community partners, is just have respect for time, have respect for potentially how long things might take. And I know, especially our academic partners they exist in a state of somewhat insecurity as well, right? It's that, and we know that's not easy.
Yeah.
But just because you're not finding something easy, we have a responsibility to try and make it a bit easier of a system to navigate for others.
My final question, you've created something, and I know that's not easy. And in the context of a world which is difficult, crisis-filled, chaotic at times, how do you stay optimistic?
So for me, optimism comes from a couple of different things. Firstly, my relationship with my faith. I'm a Sikh man. I'm an Amritdhari Sikh man, which means I'm kind of close in terms of my practice of the Sikh faith. And for me, within the Sikh faith, there is an idea of Chardi Kala, which is ever-ascending optimism. And within that, there is a perspective that is, I have to be compassionate in how I'm critical, but then also have to be critical in my compassion. Because we know optimism can sometimes lead to, whether we want to call it toxic positivity or whatever you want to call it. But for me, there is an important balance there between being critical and being kind of compassionate and optimistic. And the second thing is, surround yourselves with people who uplift you. From the work we do through Tarakī, we're very fortunate to be a kind of mental health focused community organisation that I hope is okay for the mental health of our staff.
Yes.
Right? That's from the beginning, that's always been really important to me. And building that kind of work culture and building good people around you, that then just feeds itself and you're able to get a lot of positive work done.
Great. Well, thank you, Shuranjeet. Look, I could keep talking to you for ages, and I'm sure the audience would love to keep hearing from you for
We have
ages.
5 hours of the flight left.
Yeah, we should watch a movie. Look, thank you very much. It's been really wonderful. Could everybody thank Shuranjeet? It's been fantastic. Thank you very much. After you. And I should say, after our next speaker, we'll get the 3 speakers back to have some question and answer time for everybody. So, to introduce our next speaker, hi, I'm glad you're here. Anna Echeverri is a person with a significant amount of experience designing, implementing, evaluating impactful public policies. She's held leadership roles at federal, state and international levels. She's worked with organisations such as the United Nations and USAID. I suspect that's probably not the case anymore, but you're going to come and talk to us now, and we're really looking forward to hearing you. So if everybody could welcome you to the stage, that would be really wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm Anna Echeverri. I'm the CEO for Reinserta. We are a non-profit organization dedicated to transforming the lives of children and adolescents who have been impacted by violence in Mexico. You see me here looking very professional and prepared, but inside and along with almost 80 people from Reinserta in Mexico, we are celebrating the opportunity to be here. So thank you to the organizations, to GCC Canada for inviting us, and thank you all for being here and be kind to hear and learn about our organization. At Reinserta, we believe that the true change happens when we address not only the violence, but the root causes of the violence. It's not just about offering second chances, as we do. It's about rebuilding the foundations of which those second chances are built. Our work focuses on creating innovative solutions that combine mental health, resilience, and reintegration, ensuring that young people in conflict with the law have the tools they need to rewrite their future. So violence is not a random thing. It follows patterns. These patterns are fueled by exclusion and lack of opportunities. In Mexico, as you know, thousands of children grow up in environments where violence is an everyday reality. Our mission in Reinserta is to disrupt these cycles by providing mental health support, reintegration programs, and to address the deep wounds these young people carry. We work with those who have been directly impacted by violence, helping them not only to heal, but also to reintegrate into society in a meaningful and sustainable way. So what we would do? We work with 3 main groups. Children born and raised in prison till 3 years old, survivors of extreme violence, and adolescents in the reintegration process within and outside the detention centers. Each of these groups faces, as you know, unique challenge, but what they share is the need for healing. They need a healing approach and a systemic approach, and our approach is not just about rehabilitation. It's about breaking the cycles of violence and exclusion so they don't repeat. What you just saw gives you a glimpse into reality of these young people. But now I'm going to present one, and that's why we are here and very excited. One of our most innovative approach is the radio and mental health program. This is a unique initiative that is refining now how we think about reintegration and resilience. I think the video is missed. Let me see. Yeah. Sorry, yes. Because I saw, sorry, but I'm going to show you like a cut of what is our radio and health program. And then I will share some information about this program. So sorry for the inconvenience, but it's very important that you see the video. Excuse me.
El programa de radio y salud mental de Reinserta es un proyecto que utiliza los podcasts como un medio para que personas jóvenes compartan temas como es la depresión, la ansiedad y el estrés postraumático.
O sea, yo sí soy de la idea que sí hay centros de rehabilitación que sí funcionan, porque donde yo fui fue uno.
Resiliencia Canera es un proyecto único que honra las experiencias de personas que ya pasaron por un proceso de internamiento y quienes aún se encuentran en él.
Porque realmente lo que va a funcionar es todo lo que tú estás haciendo ahorita, lo que quieres hacer bien y cómo lo vas a cambiar. Entonces creo que sí es muy importante eso, ¿no? El motivarlos, el motivar a la gente todos los días y a todos los adolescentes que quieran ayuda, jóvenes que han estado en reinserción pueden contactarnos.
We know. I don't know why this happened because there is a lot of slides missing and we saw the presentation. I don't know what happened. Okay. I'm sorry. Okay. No, I'm going to follow the slides as it's coming. So.
Do you want them to go back?
No, it's okay. So, how do we do it? We have developed like a structured, evidence-based, and replicable model that ensures long-term impact. We have a structured and replicable system. We have each intervention, we have a detailed protocols allowing us to scalability and consistency across any kind of the implementation. We also have a multi-level intervention strategy. That means that we do not only work with young people, but also work with their families, the communities, the justice system, in order to create like a lasting change. And also, we have an ongoing process of evaluation and adaptation. I know. It's not a slide. No, I don't know. I don't know what happened with the order of the slides. Sorry. I was very prepared, but I don't know what happened with. But the Reinserta model is built in three like big pillars that work together to heal trauma and support reintegration. Oh my God. I'm very confused with this. Yes, because I don't know. I think the order is like missed. Yeah, it's not the order that we presented earlier. Thank you very much, and sorry for you because I am a little bit.
Hey, Anna.
Yeah.
It's back to the first slide now.
Okay.
So if you just use the clicker to go forward, it should take you to where you need to go to.
Perfect. Okay. I think we are all set. It gives you like the expectation about the program, but it's okay. What if innovation is a mental health and resilience was the key for young people in custody to break the cycle of violence and build a new future? This is our hypothesis. And we think that traditional reintegration programs focus mainly on educational and employment approaches. And while these are important, they often overlook something that is fundamental, the mental health. The reality is that young people don't heal from their post-trauma. They will continue to reproduce cycles of violence, even if they have these opportunities. So, this our program try to respond this answer. What if mental health and resilience were the key to breaking the cycle? That's exactly the approach we are taking. We have integrate mental health into education and daily life. We don't see this like a separate intervention. All our mental health treatment is woven in everything from education to reintegration. In this process, our beneficiaries learn emotional regulation, conflict resolution, and resilience building skills as part of their development. Also, we combined a hybrid model, in-person and digital, for long-term impact. We combine these in-person sessions in juvenile centers with digital tools that ensure supports continue even after the release. So they have the capabilities, all the tools that we gave them in order to use these tools when they are released. We expand the impact through media and storytelling. And for us, this is very important because by using the radio digital platforms and the podcast, we are taking their voices beyond the detention centers. You know that these are very confined spaces. In Mexico are more confined, so they can give their message outside and also share the message with other young people that are in other centers of detention. These help us to raising awareness and breaking stereotypes about reintegration. So, as you know, the juvenile system was not designed, or at least in Mexico, to heal. It was designed to punish. And we think that's the problem. The majority of adolescents in conflict with the law have experience, and not because the opportunities, the economic situation in their families, many associated with lack of opportunities of poverty, they experience extreme violence, abandonment, and trauma in early ages. So, but how often they receive psychological care? Even never. So at Reinserta, we make mental health the foundation of reintegration. This is our approach. And what do we do? How do we know that this works? We have validated psychological assessment tools. There are internationally recognized psychometric tools that allow us to assess the young people to track anxiety, trauma, depression levels before, during, and after the intervention. And when we have all these follow-up, we can personalize interventions and ensure young people receive support, the really support they truly need in order to be personalized. We also have a real-time data way of monitoring the emotional well-being of the participants, and we can, in this way, adjust strategies during the period of intervention. And also, it's very important that we are neuroscience-based trauma healing. We have a very beautiful process that we teach young people how their brain reacts to trauma. We all know that this is common in the healing trauma, is the way in which our brain use ways, like learn new ways to react to some situations, to have more time to think about that and to react in a way that they can change the situation. So this is a very scientist-based intervention too. And in this kind of intervention also, this helps them to rebuild healthier patterns and coping mechanisms. You know, there are young people that have really stressing situations after, during, and before the detention. I think it is a... Esto ya vemos. Okay, so which are our goals? As you know, and you can, I'm going to make here like a marketing announcement, but you can see all our figures and all our stories and something like that I cannot tell you right now in our webpage, reinserta.org, and our Instagram page, so follow us. But there is some of our numbers that I have. I really think that is going to show you the realities. And the most important one is 90% of participants have not reoffended. This is very important because, thank you, we know. Because it's important for not only the society, but for them. They have another way to live their lives. Also, we show with this that emotional healing is a key to preventing recidivism. This is very important because you know all the approaches that we have is in the subject of education or maybe in the work field, but with this implementation, we know that the key point, if we sum up all of those interventions, but with the psychological element, is the key for our exit in this program. Also, we have conducted hundreds of mental health workshops, and also we work hardly to make policy changes to protect children born in prison, ensure better condition of these children. Also, we have a program that we not only work with the young people, but also improve the physical and structural condition of the detention centers. So one of the biggest challenges in reintegration program is ensuring that the impact doesn't disappear, that once people leave detention, this impact is going to continue. Many programs, as you know, focus on rehabilitation while the young people are inside. But what happens when they are outside the walls? What are you going to do with that? We think that without ongoing support, many fall back into the same cycles of crime. This is a reality. And then they are going to finish in the justice system for adults, and it's an even worse situation for them. We know and we are committed that this transformation is a long-term effort. We don't prepare young people to leave detention only. We prepare them to succeed in life beyond it. So, as we have seen the results, this is very important because the adolescents and young people who completed our program show, with the tools that I mentioned that you can look at the website, a medium to high willingness to seek professional psychological help and after release. And also, that is a big game changer, because it means that the intervention doesn't just impact them in the present, it equips them with lifelong tools for emotional regulation, self-awareness, and resilience. We do like 3 phases of the program before they go out to the prison center. We have a structured post-release support. It includes like a psychological follow-up, a connection with work and educational forms, continue monitoring them in the reintegration program. We have a strategic alliance with employment, agencies, media, in order to give them the opportunity to work, to educate. And also, this is a very good result of this program. We have developed a peer-to-peer support mentors group. And this is like the thing, the star in the horizon that we want to continue to do, is because these young people who have been part of our program are making themselves as mentors of other people that are inside the prison system, and have the mental health tools to give them an example. And the other thing that is very important is that we have a restorative approach that is very important for them to take the responsibility, to make accountability about their actions, but for that kind of actions in a good action for the communities, and to become cultural changers of way of mind. So now I want you to see, and to close this presentation, to see our Carlos and Monse. They are going to talk to you about their experience, and thank you very much.
Alguien como yo es muy difícil adaptarse afuera, porque pues al fin de cuentas la sociedad no se va a adaptar a mí. Yo soy quien como que me debo adaptar a la sociedad, pero pues es bien frustrante querer y no poder, porque pues yo sí siempre quise. Yo sí, pues yo no quería sufrir, yo no quería no encontrar trabajo. Pues es difícil querer, pero no poder. Y eso es algo que me he dado cuenta que ya poco a poco me he ido reintegrando. Ya siento esta parte de adaptación, ya así como llegué, ya no la siento así, ¿no? He ido integrándome, he ido aprendiendo de los demás, he ido aprendiendo hasta de los chavos que vienen, los otros chavos, pues también les aprendo, de la gente que está aquí, o sea, eso es lo que he crecido.
Lo que menos te pregunta la gente es lo que quieres, ¿no? Más bien te ponen una etiqueta y te juzgan así como de, ay, güey, ya estuviste en la cárcel, entonces no puedes, pues ya como que no les importan tus sueños o los planes que tenías en tu vida. Entonces cuando yo llego a Reinserta, lo que pasa es que yo llego y lo primero que me preguntan es, ¿qué querías hacer tú? O sea, esa Monse que ya estuvo en la cárcel, que vivió todas esas experiencias, ¿qué quiere? ¿Cuáles eran sus sueños? ¿Cuáles eran sus metas? ¿Qué te gustaría estudiar? ¿Qué te gustaría hacer? Y al poder enfrentarme a la vida y demostrarle a las personas que, pues al final de cuentas soy un ser humano, ¿no? Igual que todos, que tuve un error y que tengo derecho a volver a salir, ¿no? A sobresalir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Is my mic on? Thank you very much, everybody. My name is Joseph Duffy. I'm the CEO of Jigsaw. So we have about 10 minutes, and we're going to do some question and answers. So while Pat, Shuranjeet, and Anna come back up onto the stage, we have questions through the app and then also the microphones in the room. My sense in terms of listening to you all this morning was, Pat, you talked about models, Shuranjeet, you talked about movement, and Anna, you talked about momentum. And there's a real sense in terms of looking at how we can bring everything together. So what we will start with is the question from the floor first, if that's okay.
Well, good morning, and thank you guys so much for showcasing the power of what we can do. I loved hearing the different perspectives from across the globe. I am a psychiatric dietitian from the United States, and I've focused both in corrections as well as in adolescence for most of my career. And I'm hoping that you guys can speak to sort of a global issue of culinary illiteracy that we have amongst our youth and humans in general. How can we take some of these issues related to learning how to feed ourselves and take care of our brain as an organic substrate so that we can get those treatment interventions at lower levels of severity?
Who would like to take that?
I mean, I can give that a go. It's definitely not my area of expertise, but I think it links into my turmeric anecdote. I think there's a lot that we can learn from intergenerational wisdom in some of these conversations. You know, we're not looking to completely reinvent the wheel in some of these conversations, but merely try and unpick the kind of presumed knowledge we have now in relation to the various different things that have existed across societies over centuries and over millennia. So I think this, rather than being a question of new knowledge, is partly a question of new knowledge, but then also partly reconnecting with knowledge, which may have previously been kind of looked down upon or disparaged in different contexts. So yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Just in a very focal way, we know that if young people have a significant mental illness, they risk dying 15 to 20 years earlier than everybody else, and you know, diet and physical health causes is obviously the major reason there. So much better diet and nutrition, but it's also like a poverty thing as well. So that it's not just literacy, it's affordability and I suppose, but as you say, education would really help.
Okay. Thank you. There's a question that has come in on the app. I'm not sure if the question relates to which panel member, but the question is, do you consult with youth and people with lived experience? What feedback have they given you? I don't know whether that's a question for Anna. Do you want to ask?
Yes, we co-create all our approaches in our programs, because we work directly with our target population. For instance, in the podcast, all the content of the podcast, the radio, are co-created with them. So we are not just giving them the speech. So we gave them the opportunity to reflect about the issues that are important. In the last one that I was, they were talking about suicide, how do you say, self-harm, and something like that. And we look at the reflections about why they think about this experience related to the way in which they cannot ever express their feelings about emotional things. And if we use this kind of methods, they can construct their own realities and their own narratives, and we learn from that. So we adjust and adapt our program, our interventions, knowing that there is a lack of ways in which they can communicate, even the language, how to communicate the feelings. Many of the boys, all the system of masculinity inside prison. So we hear them, work with them and adjust our interventions and mental health treatment in order to focus in that kind of preoccupations.
Okay, thank you.
I could say, and I'm sure, Joseph, you'd echo this, that one of the success factors of this whole youth mental health model development has been the intrinsic involvement of young people right from the beginning. And I know Jigsaw has had a young person on the board almost from the beginning.
We have, yeah.
And we have at Origin now, and we have our Director of Lived Experience here at the conference, Rafi Amanto. So, and it's at every level of Origin, it's every level of Headspace, and it's without that it just wouldn't be successful. So it's an absolutely vital feature. You know?
Absolutely. We'll take another question from the floor, if we can. The gentleman.
Hi. This question is for Dr. McGorry, and it's great to have you in Vancouver. I'm with my colleagues. We're part of the Missing Middle program locally, and I'd like to ask you about your work with Origin. Part of what we're trying to do is exactly what you mentioned, which is paradigm change, systems change, how to have more youth-informed practices in psychiatry. I think one of the practices that's very disempowering for youth is psychiatric intakes and the standard questions. From your perspective, Dr. McGorry, what are some practices we can change to have more of a paradigm change?
Thank you. That's a great question. Well, I think we were hearing some of those right throughout the conference. Actually, it's softening the entry. That's probably a good way of describing it. Using a whole range of approaches, actually, and I think I'm sure most people have heard of the friendship bench idea. From Zimbabwe. Well, try to build that into the front end of our system. So it's very informal. The first contact, a bit like what you were talking about. So you're actually it's all you could say it's all about engagement, but it's actually about trust as well, and it's a very difficult thing to seek help in the first place, and the traditional systems are almost hostile, especially emergency departments, and even when you're trying to be youth friendly, like with a Headspace, I remember hearing young people say, I walked up and down the street about 5 or 6 times before I was able to walk in the door. So the environment, the way it's configured, I remember the Jigsaw in Galway was amazing for that. The mindset of the staff, the friendliness of the receptionists, but having informal people. And I remember in the At Ease program in Netherlands, where they had all these young students just sitting around in the foyer, available to be spoken to as the first step, and then you kind of help people move to the next step. So it's all based on those very sort of community wisdom, in a way, of how and putting yourself in the shoes of the person who is actually seeking help, and being guided by the young people of how it's going to work best. And it has to be flexible because everyone's different in the way they want to do that. But the traditional systems, it's very hard to stop turning everything into looking like a standard clinic. Even the real estate that you can actually rent to provide the services works against it sometimes. So it's a massive issue. It's not really a missing middle issue. The missing middle issue is the fact that we've set up these entry-level youth services, and then the more specialised care is a million miles away from us.
The services are missing, aren't they? Yeah.
Huge hole in the middle.
Yeah. Thinking about engagement, there's a question for Shuranjeet here, but I think it probably applies to all range of services in the room. So the question is, could you share some tips regarding how we could best engage boys and men in conversations about mental health?
Yeah, so I think the first thing to say is conversations between boys and men about mental health take place. They just don't necessarily take place in the ways, or present themselves in the ways that we can kind of make sense of. Within the work that we do, a couple of really important points. We don't use the word or the term mental health in any of our comms for our men's peer support spaces, because we know that the label, even the phrase mental health itself is loaded. We all might be here comfortable using the term, talking to each other about this topic, but many people, especially in multiply marginalized contexts, aren't necessarily as comfortable or might not be as confident engaging with a service that is labelled mental health. So the first thing that we do is not use mental health in the comms for the peer support that we do. And the second thing is linked to what I was talking about, is building in a strengths-based approach to how we do our peer support. Whether that is peer support based around activities, or whether that's peer support based around particular places that already feel comfortable and welcoming for men in our communities. We really run with some of the things that are already tried and tested. We're not looking to completely reinvent those spaces, but what we're doing is making small adjustments so that actually they are welcoming, inclusive, and responsive to conversations around mental health and well-being, as opposed to dismissive of them.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to go with a question for Anna, which is the first question there. It's a question which, Anna, you mentioned in your presentation that one of the intentions of detention centres is a place for punishment, a place for containment, and potentially not healing. How do you get buy-in from the detention centres to provide the programme, to engage in the programme?
This is like two factors, like a scenario.
Okay.
The first one is that there are many people inside these centers that are willing to do the center, yes, and a good reintegration institution. And the other side is that they don't have the budget for do that. So they can cope only with some strict regulation about what they have to provide to these boys and girls. Is just like work and education.
Okay.
So yes, the other part of the answer is yes, we work along all the penitentiary system in Mexico City and Estado de Mexico and Nuevo León, and they are very open to work with us. They are open their doors where they provide our space to do that, to enter the equipment, to have the time with the people. But we are thinking to scale because we have a very good indicators, as you know. And but for this kind of situation, from both ways, they have the willing, but not the money. We have the willing, and we are looking for the money.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
So yes.
Thank you. We have time for one more question. I'll take it from the gentleman in the grey jumper who's been waiting for a minute.
Hi, my name is Isaiah, and I have a question specifically for Shuranjeet. I am the chairman for a men's mental health group, and one of the challenges that we've had is navigating this notion of masculinity and mental health. A lot of times when we have men that come into a space and want to talk, it can create a locker room or a toxic environment. And I'm wondering if you have any advice or have experienced any challenges with this matter.
It's a really, really good question. And in the training and support that we provide for our facilitators, we come across some of these conversations and we can't shy away from them. We know that globally across digital media, social media, there is a real hyper-masculine response to insecurity in different ways that's happening at the moment, and this presents itself in conversations about mental health and responses to conversations around mental health. So what we've found to be most helpful is ensuring that the folks, the peer supporters that we train, are able to actually hold some of these difficult conversations. So instead of silencing, and instead of making men feel as though they've been silenced, we need to be able to work so that they feel heard, but also they understand that maybe talking in that way or kind of stereotyping people in that way, it's not something that is supportive. It's not something that creates an inclusive space, and it's something that can actually have a detrimental impact on the mental health and well-being of other people in that space. And so what I don't what I try not to do within our work. I don't try to make it an academic or an intellectual battle in that moment, because all you're doing is pushing that person back into their sphere of communication where they already feel as though they're not being heard or listened to, which in a way pushes them across the spectrum of radicalization, particularly when it comes to kind of hypermasculinity as we see it now. And so for me, it's about being able to confront and having those tough conversations and rooting it in the fact that speaking or kind of using terms in this way, or as you said, kind of that kind of locker room talk, it's not something that's supportive of the mental health and well-being of everyone in that space. And if everyone in that space is there for each other and want to be there for each other, they should be committed to engaging in a way that is mutually supportive.
Thank you very much. Just listening to the answers you're giving and thinking about the talks this morning, there's a real sense of compassion from the three of you. And thinking about, Pat, you were talking about the models and really thinking about how that's fit for people. Shuranjeet, thinking about, as you were saying, the compassion and connecting with the community. But also, Anna, thinking about the community inside a prison, a detention centre, but also the community outside. So I think my sense, for personally, I think I've learned a huge amount this morning. So we're just about to finish. Can you give a great, really warm round of applause to them all?
Thank you.
There was a couple more questions. If you can try and nab some of the panel over coffee, I'm sure that we'd be very willing to have further conversations with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pat. Thank you.